So we're going to do 20 minutes presentation and 40 minutes creative collaboration. And the idea is not that we decide something that we're all going to do together, but it just inspires you and gives you a catalyst for some thoughts. So I'm going to talk about my idea. My idea is not Matthew 28 verse 19, therefore go and make disciples. But I want to talk to you about what that means to me, and I want to make a proposal to you. I founded Pais in 1992. This is me when I was young. I carry this photo just so people know I was young once. And this is the first team. We have the young lady on the left is called Ulrika. She was from Germany. Lisa was fresh out of high school. She was 18 years old. Joanne was very posh. She was from a rich family down south in England. And Gary is a guy I'm still talking to. We still have good conversations. Spoke to him last week, and he's in Australia in Perth right now. And we went into schools every single day. Sometimes we would do something like 14 lessons in public schools quite often. And I started this 4 years after I went into ministry. I started in ministry 6 months before this happened. 6 months before I got married in what is quite obviously the 80s. Some of those haircuts are back in fashion, which is kind of cool. So me and my wife is called the Foxy Lynn, and we've been married just over 25 years. So I've been doing skills ministry and youth ministry of one kind or another, or organising people who do youth ministry for 26 years. Now, when you look at this photo, what you see is two people who look very happy together, and we still are. However, we came from really different backgrounds. I came from an all-male background, so apart from my mum, but my mum wasn't even a girly girl, you know. When I was at school as an infant and a junior, we were separated from the girls. So you could go into a class, but you couldn't talk to them really. And then when you went into the playground at break time, you never spoke. They were in totally separate parts of the campus. When I got to high school, I went to an all-boys school. There were no girls at all. So I didn't really connect with girls till I was about 16 years old. And in our house, it was very male-oriented. There was me, my dad, and my brother. And very conservative kind of family. My wife came from whatever the exact opposite of that is. Her family is completely female. Her dad wasn't a great dad and left when they were young. So it was her 3 sisters, and her mum on what's called a council estate in Manchester. Even in summer, the heating was really, really high. There were 2 bathrooms, apparently. I could never get in any of them because they were always busy. And she came from a completely female, kind of liberal kind of background. So one day I sat down with Lynn and I said to Lynn, should we get married? And if you imagine these 2 think bubbles appeared. And I said, hey Lynn, would you like to do this for the rest of our lives? And she said, absolutely, I'd love to do this for the rest of our lives. And we agreed to 2 very different things, both called marriage. But my model of marriage and her model of marriage were completely different. And it took us 25 years to find out and understand those differences. One of my proposals today is that Jesus said, go and make disciples. And we've said, okay, we're going to make disciples, but we're thinking about 2 completely different things. 2 completely different things. So I want to talk about those 2 different things. And what I want to do just for 5 minutes before I make my proposal is this. I want to show you what I believe was in Jesus' think bubble when it came to discipleship. So when he said, go and make disciples, youth pastors, go and make disciples, I want to show you what the tradition and the sayings of the day made him think discipleship was. Jesus didn't invent discipleship, of course, but he went along with the discipleship ideas of the day. He brought in some new intention, but he basically went with the things I'm going to share. So I'm going to share from not just the Bible, I'm going to share initially from some sayings and traditions in the Second Temple period. And what I want you to do is just think, how do these thoughts on discipleship compare to our modern thoughts on discipleship, okay? So I'm just going to read some sayings. I've not made these up, and these are direct quotes from things like the Mishnah and the Talmud, Jewish writings of the time, or Jewish writings about the time. So for instance, your father brings you into the world, but your rabbi brings you into the world to come. So disciples were seen as children. If a man's father and rabbi are both taken captive, a disciple should ransom his rabbi first. Kind of interesting, strong relationship. If his father and rabbi are carrying heavy burdens, he removes first that of his master and afterwards that of his father. If a disciple went into exile, his rabbi should go with him, according to the Babylonian Talmud. And there are historical examples of that happening. Interesting relationship between disciples and followers. All acts a slave performs for his master, a disciple performs for his rabbi, except untying the sandal. Which brings a bit of sense into John's comment on Jesus, which is, I'm not even worthy to untie his sandal. Why? Because he knew this saying. So there was this really interesting relationship between a disciple and the discipler. And I think that what we've got now is we've got a situation where we're trying to encourage people to be our disciples, whereas in Jesus' day, you did great if you qualified to be somebody's disciple. And there's this very strong relationship, which I want to talk about in a moment. I find this quite interesting. A man could follow a rabbi without permission from his wife for up to 30 days. So what that means is you could be working in a field and a rabbi that you really like could be coming by and you're hearing him every so often, and one day you think, I just want to be like this guy. So you drop everything, and up to 30 days, legally, according to the religious law, you could up sticks and just go with this rabbi without first checking with your wife. I know what my wife would say to me. It's like, yeah, off you go with your boyfriend, I don't care. That's exactly what she would say to me. After 30 days, you could leave for longer after 30 days. Why? Because rabbis and those who disciple people had two types of people. They had students and they had Talmudim disciples. Students just came to hear what the teacher knew, what the rabbi knew. A disciple wanted to be who the rabbi was. So a student would turn up to the synagogue and listen to the teaching. A disciple would follow the rabbi in order to become what the rabbi was. And that means that we have a different way of looking at things as far as our distinctive. And we think the discipleship is beyond education to experience. So part of our proposal for us to think about in a few minutes is, what if discipleship is not, I'm going to educate you and hope you go and have an experience, but is instead the biblical model, which is, come with me and experience what it looks like when the kingdom of heaven touches earth, and along the way I'll educate you. That would mean that we would know it needs to go into schools, we would need to reach people, and we would invite them not to an education, but we would invite them to an experience that we're already on. The Christians are in the school of how to reach your school. How do you communicate your faith in a school? Right now I'm doing this in businesses. And one of the reasons I'm going is to help the CEOs think, how do I translate what I hear in church into language I can use in my business on a daily basis that doesn't sound awkward, but fits the biblical model. So I don't know if you've ever, because I want to come to my proposal now, I don't know if you've ever thought to yourself, or if you can ever remember when you started to have doubts about the way you did things. When doubts started to come in. I remember exactly where I was. I was literally running through the streets of Glasgow, holding onto my chest, having a really bad asthma attack. And the reason was about 3 miles from where this photograph is taken, maybe 2 miles, I was in a street theatre. And I was in this organisation, we did street plays, Christian street plays. I played Adam. I know it's a stretch, but I did. I played Adam. And then afterwards I would give my testimony. On one particular day, this young man had come up to me and said, I want to respond to this. How do I become a Christian? He'd seen the play, heard me give my testimony. How do I become a Christian? So I led him to the Lord. Now, as an organisation, we'd been together every day for about 3 months, praying for revival and all believing that God was going to send revival to Europe through Scotland, probably because of what we were doing. So all we thought about was a revival. This young man gets saved. I turned to my leader and said, he's just given his life to the Lord. What do we do next? And the guy said to me, we've done our job. And I said, well, what about discipleship? What about getting him into a church? oh, that's a good idea, but our coach is leaving in 10 minutes. And if you miss the coach, you won't be able to get back to the campus tonight. So I had literally 10 minutes. I ran him, literally grabbed hold of his hand, took him, knocked on a church door, met the pastor, introduced him to the pastor, went back and the coach had gone. And I spent about 5 minutes running down these streets, having an asthma attack, trying to intercept the coach, which I finally did by playing chicken with the coach, basically. I jumped in front of it, it screeched to a halt, and I got on board and had to get some. And during my run, I think it was actually down this road, and as I'm having an asthma attack, this thought occurs to me. And the thought was this: does our structure tell us that we don't really believe this is going to happen? Does our structure tell me that we don't really believe this is going to happen? So we can pray for revival, we can talk about discipleship, but I don't believe that discipleship will happen because of what we teach. I think discipleship is going to happen because of how we restructure ourselves for discipleship. And that's my proposal. My proposal is we need to think about this equation. This equation explains to you how many relationships there are in a room. It tells you that in a room of 2 people, there's 1 relationship. In a room of 3 people, there are 3 relationships. In a room of 5 people, there are 10 different relationships. In a room of 100 people, there are 4,950 different relationships. That means in a room of 100 people, there's 4,950 different ways of doing things, at least. And one of the problems that we have, and one of the ways that we're structured right now, is one-to-many. I speak to this person and maybe he shares his ideas with me. I speak with this person, maybe he shares, but really I speak and hopefully they'll go and do things based off what I come up with. What would it be like if we went from one-to-many to many-to-many? Where we take that rabbinic position, where we're taking people on experience and helping them to formulate vision, helping them to own what we're doing. But it takes a different structure. So what we've done in the organisation I lead is we've created something called the flow. One of the problems with the pyramid organisation is you work your way up the top, and the higher you go, the less of the things that everybody else does that you do. So eventually you get to a place where you're telling people what you once did. I was at a college recently, we were talking, and the professor said to me, one of my difficulties is I'm teaching people a 10-year-old model from when I was doing what I was doing. I'll explain this to you. These titles, and I'll show you a possible youth ministry one in a minute, these different titles represent different positions on Pais. So founding director, national director, we have Pais in about 8 or 9 nations. Hub leaders, they're people who oversee several teams. Team leaders, team members, mentees, which are school students and youth students, and the mentees, friends and family. And what we've done is we've created discipleship packages for every single different type of relationship. And this does a number of things for us, just for you to think about. The first thing it does is it makes us understand that every one of us should be doing a version of what everybody else is doing. So I disciple these people, or I at least mentor these people. I do things, they come with me, they watch me, we do it together. So that when students are reaching their friends, they have a model. And the national directors have a model as they train their team leaders, because they can see what I'm doing on a daily basis. It might be slightly different training, it might be a slightly different experience, but they can see if I do it with competence. They see how much time and effort I put into it. They see how I handle issues that come up. And there's a discipleship. One of the problems I think most organisations have, and I would imagine must have been in Jesus' thought, is how do you get a pure idea to go all the way through an organisation, travel 2,000 miles or 10,000 miles, wherever distance is from, say, Jerusalem to Texas, over 2,000 years and stay pure? How do you do that? I think the idea was discipleship. The idea was something similar to this. And what we've learned is this, is that an idea becomes distorted when somebody along this line decides, I'm just going to do my own thing. And what this does for us, even though it's just visual semantics, is it helps us see that. So in the past, when we've had maybe a team leader, and you might have a volunteer who heads up a small group for you, decides, I'm not going to carry on passing along the teaching and the culture and the training and the vision, what we do. I'm just going to do my own thing with this small group, or I'm going to do my own thing with the team. What this does, it helps them see that suddenly they stop the flow. They stop the flow of authority and they stop the flow of teaching. Now, this is not easy to do. We've had to create mentoring and discipleship packages for each one of these different, we call them locks, as in like a canal or a river, a lock. But it's been really, really profitable. I believe what this does is not necessarily grow an organisation, but it makes it more authentic. So I'm much more convinced now that what I might teach or what our vision might be that some of us come up with here will actually happen in schools. It's great to go around, I've done it, great to go around and travel and have that lovely idea that when you teach people, take what you do and go and do it. What this does, it helps you find out if it's really happening or not, which isn't always a good thing. But the reason we don't ask questions is because we don't want to know what the answers are. But I want to know what the answers are. I want to know if when these guys share vision and we think about it and we present it all the way through the flow, I want to know if it's happening in Brazil. I want to know if it's happening in Germany. I want to know if it's happening in Ghana where Pais teams are. I'm sure when God gives you a vision and you have volunteers, you want to know, is this going to happen in the school? Is this happening in the youth group? Is this happening when there's one of my volunteers sitting down with a young person? Is the vision, is the purity really happening? So we want to suggest this. My proposal is this, is that we think through how this actually works. Are we, or do we need to restructure to see discipleship really happen? Is the present typical youth model, does it really facilitate discipleship? Or does it just facilitate education that we hope will lead to an experience? It might be something like this. It might be the youth pastor. Let's say it's a mega church. Youth pastor, maybe disciples and mentors his youth staff. And his youth staff help mentor and disciple the youth volunteers and the students and their friends and family. The fact is, relationships are special, but relationships are also spatial. You can't have the same relationship with everybody. Better to invest into some people and have a system and a structure where they can invest in an equal manner into other people. Otherwise, what you have is you have a youth pastor who's really close with maybe 5 or 6 kids in youth group, and a lot of them feel like they're missing out. Better to train people to reproduce what you do. I was going to show you this video, but I won't, but you can find it online. It's called The Spirit of a Pioneer, and you can see this in process. So there's a film, it's free to watch on Vimeo. You can go to thespiritofapioneer.com, and you can see how this literally works out in countries all around the world. Let me leave you with one last thought, and then I'm going to give us the thing for us to collaborate over. Stonehenge, interesting place in England. Do you know what happened at Stonehenge? Nobody does. There's all sorts of ideas, but nobody does. But you know why? Because there's no witness. There's no living stones to explain to people or to show people what happened. So we just have a lot of guessing games. And again, I think what we need is we need living stones that are giving examples of what's in the Bible, not simply taking people and saying, read this, this is what you should be doing. So I want to propose that we think about how do we restructure youth ministry with discipleship at the heart, and what would that actually look like? My proposal is this: you can preach as much as you want about discipleship, it's not going to happen unless you restructure. That's my thoughts, and it's just there to help you think through and hopefully inspire. Let me give you the questions. If you want to talk to me separately, feel free on my Facebook and Twitter. But here's the question we're going to discuss, and Ken's going to come out and help us think through this. But the question as she's coming out is, if you were to restructure youth ministry in order to fulfill the call to true discipleship, what might that look like? Let me just highlight one more thing. I'm suggesting discipleship, the biblical model, is an experience that leads to education rather than an education that we hope they have an experience of.